Well, this story, as you know, is 26 years old. And so I was at Rockwell Collins, was Rockwell International at the time in 1998 when I got a phone call from Nauticos and Gary Bain, the vice president. And they were wondering if we could take a look at uh, the Earhart communications. And could you tell, well, is she going away from the Howland or towards Howland and all that? And they thought maybe it'd take like 3 hours, you know. And as we got into it, we pulled a team together and started in January because we had the NDAs and all that to go through. Once we did that, Dave Jordan sent us the logs and some of the data on Itasca and what have you, all the background information, and we pulled a team together. I was contacted because at the time I was the president of the Collins Radio Club, and so I knew a lot of different engineers that were working at Collins, Rockwell Collins. And so I started looking at, okay, it's an HF high frequency problem. And so Rod Bloxham, whom you know, of course, he's a senior system engineer, Rockwell Engineer of the Year award recipient. There was another senior system avionics engineer who was a Rockwell International Engineer of the Year awardee. We picked out some propagation experts, some antenna experts, some transmitter experts, all out of our high frequency area, and the corporate pilot, who is also a radio operator and has been involved in this now for also 25 years, 26 years. So this team we pulled together, and we got together in January of 99, and we started looking at all the data. And as we looked at it, Rod comes up and he says, we can't do this. What do you mean we can't do it? This is my, what do you mean? Does that mean we just go back to Nauticos and tell them, okay, no, it can't be done? And he goes, no, let's look at it a little more, and it's the kind of thing when you have a group of engineers, mostly electrical engineers, some system and software engineers, and you get them together and you give them a problem out in front of them. We've always said it's like waving, raw meat in front of a shark. It's like that's what they do. They solve problems. Engineers love to solve problems. And so we got together and we said, okay, we know it's impossible with what we have here because the data is too qualitative. It's not quantitative enough. And we can understand the logs perfectly well because those were radio operators that typed up the ship's logs in the Itasca. And we do, as radio operators, we use the same they call Q signals and abbreviations and what have you. So it was just like reading it and say, oh yeah, these guys are radio operators. And so we understood it, but we needed to know more quantitative data, more quantitatively in decibels and good things that dBs, decibels, that engineers like to work with. But with that, we said, well, we stood back and say, okay, we know it's impossible. And this is what I love about when I was working at Rockwell, is that, okay, we know it's impossible, but if it were possible, how would we do it? How could it be done? What are we missing? What data we don't have that we do need? And so I got a hold of our VP and told him what we were doing. He says, okay, you can use any of the company's assets, but on your own time. Doesn't that sound like a VP?
Right.
It has to be all volunteer work, and you can only do it. You can use the computers and all the test equipment and everything you need. So we started looking at it from the way we usually look at problems, is from a system engineering point of view, which Rod was smack on. He understood that very well. And we started putting together, okay, it's not like we don't know anything. We know about Amelia's plane. We know what kind of antenna she had on it. We don't know the performance of it, but we know what she had on it. We know she had a transmitter with a certain power output. And so it wasn't like we were in the dark. And the Itasca drawings and the transmitters they had, we could find those specs, and the receivers, the CGR32s that they were using, the Coast Guard did, and start to build a case and start measuring things. And we started looking for the receivers first and the CGR-32s, and like, oh man, those things are rare. All this equipment was rare,
Mhm.
and we couldn't find any at first. And today, after all our sleuth work with guys looking everywhere, we have found up 6 of them now that exist, and
Wow.
we've got them. We got them reworked. One of them was the Antique Wireless Association in Canandaigua, New York, and they helped us. We got it up to spec. We were able to measure it, get it to what the specifications said, and then we set up a recording studio, and we had a software engineer that came in, and she tried to imitate Amelia's voice, and we recorded that, and then we put it into that receiver and recorded the output at different decibel levels and known dBs. And so on the output, we had all these known dBs. But same way with the antenna, we had an expert that did modeling antenna work, and he professional at it, modeled the Electra in 3 dimensions. You could just see it in all these little wires. It looked like an Electra, and he came up with an antenna pattern and performance for that antenna. And Rod says, well, how do we know that's accurate? Well, that's true. It's just software, right? You don't know how good the model is. So we
Mhm.
said, well, that's not good enough. We went searching around, and we found a Beechcraft tri-gear in Ankeny, Iowa. And so we got permission to go out there on the tarmac, put an antenna on that thing, and we powered it up, and we spun it around and around and measured the performance of that antenna uh, over the 360 degrees. And we said, well, how do we know that's accurate? And so from there, we just kept going with it. Rod went down to the Pima Air Museum. If you've ever been down there in Tucson, they have an L10A,
Yeah.
and we put an antenna on it and measured that, measured the characteristics of that antenna. And so over time, then we came up with like, okay, we found the software was pretty good, but it wasn't perfect, and that we did find some things that we didn't know to begin with. So it was that kind of thing that built one on another. Uh, Same thing, we have software that we always had that you could measure the decrease in signal strength as the airplane, or the increase, as the case may be, with distance. So there's a curve, and with that just like if you're driving in your car and you're listening to a radio station and you drive away from it, it gets weaker and weaker. Or
Mhm.
if you go closer and closer, it comes in stronger and stronger. It's not any different on what Amelia was using on 3105 kilohertz. Not any different. And so we actually borrowed the company's Cessna 206, and we got permission to use it. And I don't think when they said you could use the company's assets, they meant the airplane too, one of the airplanes. You know what
I
I
like
mean?
the assumption that you made, though, that could possibly be in there. And for viewers and listeners who don't know, this model aircraft is very similar in spec to Amelia Earhart's Lockheed Electra, closest you could find to have access to. Is that correct?
Well, the Beech 18 is that we did our latest tests in 2020
Oh,
is
I'm
very,
sorry.
very close. And
Mhm.
so is the Tri-Gear Beech 18 that we used, was very close to
Mhm.
the same size. But this one, the Cessna 206, we ended up flying out over the ocean in a corporate pilot, volunteer work. We're
Mhm.
going up and down the coast out over the Atlantic Ocean at 1,000 feet, which she said she was traveling at 1,000 feet.
Which is
And
very
then,
close to the ocean, but it's very
mhm,
low.
yeah, 1,000 feet. In fact, Barry, the pilot, wore a life vest
Oh, I
because he
bet.
knew he wouldn't have time, if it went down. And we had ours just right next to us. But we would put an antenna out the bottom of the aircraft and transmit, and then we had a crew on the Cocoa Beach Pier sipping Mai Tais and measuring signal strength versus distance with GPS. So we
Mhm.
had so then we applied the curve to what we found to the software, and by golly, it just really a perfect curve. And we said, yes, that software is very good and is very valid. So for every step of the way, we learned new things, every step of the way. We validated what we were doing. Then we had an electrical engineering professor out in Delaware that every time we wrote a report, he went through it and said, okay, what about this or that? We tried to always have another set of eyes on what we were doing so we wouldn't get groupthink in this whole point.
Right.
So, yeah. So, we've done a lot of design of experiments, testing and flights. But as you're alluding to here in 2020, we teamed up with Dynamic Aviation in Bridgewater, Virginia. And that was, we were already 2 expeditions in. And here we are trying to restore all this old equipment that we're finding over 20 years, finding this stuff. And finally, we found her Western Electric 13 transmitter.
Mm-hmm.
That was the last piece we were missing. We had the RA1 receiver, we had the coupler units, the loop antennas for her direction finding, and finally we could do a full system test live out over the ocean. Dynamic Aviation was superb in bringing a team together to integrate the radios on the Beech 18 and then provide the pilots to go on out, and we would fly out over the Atlantic Ocean and out of Virginia, and then we had a ship, actually an old oyster boat, 1925 oyster boat, that we rigged up like the Itasca. We actually had to add more extension to the main mast to make that antenna replicate the Itasca's HF antenna. And then we also had to get permissions from the FAA to operate in those frequencies on a special temporary authorization, they call them.
Mm-hmm.
So we did all that, and we measured signal strength versus distance with the actual equipment going out and back. And then more specifically, we were measuring the direction finding capabilities because, as you know, at 8 o'clock in the morning, she said we must be on you, that we've heard your signals. The first time she admitted she ever heard the Itasca signals. And she says, but we couldn't get a minimum, meaning she was trying to get a direction, a bearing to the Itasca.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned a lot of new data from that testing. And with that, we were able to put together what we consider a final report of, okay, out of our remaining high priority area, these are the priorities of the priority areas of where we would go next.
Mm-hmm.
So 26 years later, here we are.
Oh my gosh, Tom, we could talk for hours and hours, weeks about everything you just brought up, because the intricacy of these tests, they don't just come together in a few days. You don't just call an Uber and you have a plane and you've got a pilot and you've got permissions. This is in-depth, long-term planning in conjunction with your engineering mind and all the tests you want to do. So how do you stay motivated on these long-term projects with something that does take a lot of sophistication and a lot of agreement amongst a team? How do you keep that moving forward?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, with this team, it's a team of experts. These guys are they're radio amateurs, but they are professional engineers, and that's what they do: avionics and communication, navigation. And so I think what really drives us is the mystery, right? I mean, we're just hooked on the problem now, and it's still a problem out there. It's still, okay, how are we going to solve this? So it's still that same inquisitive engineering spirit. But yes, you know yourself with your trip around the world that it takes a lot of stars to come into alignment. None the least of which was like our corporate pilot working with Daytona Center, because you're flying near Cape Canaveral all the way down past an Air Force base and a nuclear power plant. And this is after 9/11. So yeah, so you have to be careful. And we were listening at the air traffic control. We were on the headset when I was in the aircraft on that Cessna. And it's unbelievable the amount of traffic an ATC is doing up and down the coast. And he was constantly having to be on board, whether at Daytona Center or the other ATCs as they flew down the coast. So it took a lot of coordination there. Just getting permission to use the aircraft. I worked with the then vice president of engineering. So, uh, hey, Steve, your Cessna 206 needs to be flown. You know, it needs to be flown a little more. You just can't have it sitting out there. It was a test bed aircraft.
Uh-huh.
And so they hadn't done tests on it for a while. And like any aircraft, you don't want it just sitting there. The engine needs to be run and what have you. So I convinced him, we'll put all volunteer labor in. You pay for the gas. And he goes, okay. And so just those little things, though, the FAA and the FCC and getting the licensing and all that we had to do was, when you're working with other agencies, yourself,
Yes.
they don't always care about your problem. They have their own time scales and what have you.
Yeah, I really do relate to that. For instance, when we added an auxiliary 200-gallon fuel tank on board the Pilatus PC-12, which had never been done before, that put us in an experimental category for the
Right.
FAA. And
Mm-hmm.
that means different rules, different regulations, different limitations on what you can and can't do. Meanwhile, you're going through 14 countries over just 18 days. And so the complexity, it layers deeply, right? Where one move impacts 10 ripple steps over, right? Because of
Yeah.
how ingrained everything is together. So when you're talking about these radio tests, it's bringing back so many memories from my flight as well, because when you go over water, in an airplane, you no longer operate under VHF radios, which is typically, if you were to fly a Cessna or a small plane over land here in the US, use VHF radio frequencies. But when you're going international, you're going over the water, you're moving to high frequency radios. I use those.
Right.
In 2014, I was still using a high frequency radio signal to communicate around the globe. Explain to our listeners who don't have any background in radios or engineering the difference between those two systems and why the test had to be done over water.
Oh boy. Okay. Without getting technical, right?
Yes. Yeah, no
Yeah.
problem, right?
Well, the beauty of high frequency or short waves, we've known about those for quite a while, is that those electromagnetic waves will refract off the ionosphere, and so what we would call beyond line of sight. Where VHF typically is just line of sight. You have two antennas that can see each other.
Yeah.
Now, satellite communications has taken some of that out because they are line of sight, but they're going straight up to a satellite and then straight down to the aircraft. So that's taken some of that out. But
Mm.
the FAA still requires dual HFs on those transatlantic intercontinental flights. In fact, I I was program manager over the military side of that, where we're putting dual HFs on air transports for the military, ARC 190s. So they've used them since Amelia days, and they are still using high frequency communications instead of just VHF. Once you get out of the water, you have SATCOM today, but
Mhm.
they didn't have VHF back then.
Mhm.
Amelia didn't have that VHF. That wasn't until the war days. So yeah, it's fascinating, the old technology that gets involved that is still viable today.
Yeah, exactly. Things like VORs or using beacons to navigate in aviation, right? That line of sight concept is so important because that's how information is sent back and forth in a simple context. And I love, because I always I like to use metaphor around aviation and all this exploration and searching that we're doing. When you just said beyond line of sight, that's a willingness to explore beyond the typical information that is easy to access. I like that as an idea of searching for Amelia. We're going beyond line of sight because you have to see past what you don't have right in front of you, right? In instrument flying, when we use our instruments to navigate through clouds and low visibility, we can't see with our own eyes, but we trust that data and information. And so you
We sure
all with
do.
going beyond that line of sight to go search for her again. And in 2025, with all this new information that you've had from your previous radio tests and working since 1999 on this volunteer search for Amelia Earhart, from your perspective, Tom, where are we now, and why would someone in the general public get excited about this search? What does it bring up for you? Why someone might get engaged with it?
Well, with each expedition, we've had 3 now. You get excited just because okay, each time we have more data about where she was not. Now that sounds like, oh yeah, but no, you have a search area, and each time that you search an area and you say, okay, the airplane is not there, that changes the amount of higher probability areas in the other areas. And so that's what we do then is we take that, we feed it back into the model, and we know that each time we go out, there's the highest probability area out there that this could be it. This could be it. I mean, it could be on the first line, or it could be on the last line on the last minute of the last day. You don't know. That's the way it has been on some other expeditions. Uh, and you think about the problem itself. This is a 55-foot wingspan aircraft, and it's aluminum, which is good because it can really ping on sonar. But that's a pretty small target out there, and it's a big ocean, as you know, flying over it. And so I take a look at Paul Allen's group that were looking for the USS, the Indianapolis, and it's that tragic story with the guys in the water for a couple of weeks.
Mhm.
And they were torpedoed. That was an American cruiser. And that cruiser, this airplane could sit on the bow of that cruiser. That took Paul Allen, knowing roughly where it was, but they did a search area and did their homework. It took them up 4 expeditions to find that cruiser. But on the other hand, when nauticals first came to us, the whole idea was, could we, using the communications data, to back calculate not only the range to our aircraft, but also get into Fred Noonan's head on navigation to try to figure out bearing. What was Fred doing? How did he navigate back then? And each of those leads to different searches. I mean, we've been in archives all over the place. Purdue University. We've been in the University of Miami archives for the Pan Am Clipper fleet and looking at the actual logs where Fred Noonan navigated across the Pacific and seeing how he signed it, what was he doing, how was he marking out the French frigate shoals and all the little landmarks that he would find. And also, then we've got the training I've got it here, the training manual they were using. It's about that thick on how you navigate over open water and the different ways of doing the approaches, the line of sight, and you go in with a bearing, or do you do an offset navigation to the north or south? So we kind of had to get into Fred Noonan's head and do research there. But what's interesting to me is that with every new thing that we find, every new piece of data, it builds on itself. And I can remember being at Purdue University talking to the archivist there and a couple of professors. And we were there, and I said, we've been working this problem for 15 years. And it was only like 2 weeks ago that we said, wait a minute, now we know this, so this couldn't possibly have happened. And so you see what I mean? Now, as every little bit of information came along, said, nope, that couldn't have happened. That's not a possibility anymore. And we could take that off of our decision tree matrix. So, it's fascinating to see that growth. And they were saying, yes, that's why research is done at Purdue University. That's why the research is so important, is because data will build on data and will make more opportunities, and then also take things out of the picture, makes you focus in. Yeah. So we get excited every time. You can tell I'm getting excited again, you see.
I know.
I'm excited.
That's why it was such a no-brainer when I started getting involved with Nauticos. I'm like, oh, these people like to geek out on this stuff like I do in my own way, more of me for aviation and all this, but I get enthused about it because I can see the spark in your eyes. I can see you care deeply about this. You don't work on something for 20 plus years unless you really want to figure it out. And as you were just talking, Tom, what struck me is that even though this is a historic story of the question of what happened to Amelia Earhart, where were Amelia Earhart's last moments spent, this is a side of history that is still very much alive because we don't have that resolution. So it still feels like an active story to me. And when I talk to folks about joining the search, they immediately light up, right? She is still someone who we are aware of her presence, of what she left behind and what she stood for. So I know why it gets me excited, and seeing your enthusiasm about the science behind it is cool. It's sort of like a weight and balance equation on an airplane with constant changes. Like take one issue off, this adds another complication, and that really that just deep layers of it. So
Yeah.
it's fun, and I love that excitement in you.
Well, it's
Um,
not just the engineering part of it either. I mean, the historicity that you mentioned is that, here's a woman. There's at least 99 others there, but she is a risk taker.
yeah.
I mean, she's out there taking risks, having her own luggage, fashion design. She's investing in these fledgling airline industry, and she's female, and that's like wow. I mean, she got all this attention just flying in 1928 as a passenger, and she says, "Oh, that I'm just a passenger."
Right.
Well, she took that Vega, and there were other competition, other competitors there, but she went, and it was not a sure thing. Even after Lindbergh, 5 years, five other people lost their lives doing that. So there's a legacy there that I think all the guys on the team in Nauticos, we're all Ameliacs now, but we're all saying, this is a legacy that she was a part of the tapestry of America, fabric of America risk taking. Whether it's guys, and they're going up to the moon in '69, all that in that short a time from the 30s to the 60s. All these risk taking is just part of who we are, and as Americans, we push the edge. We always seem to be pushing the edge, exploring. Why else would we have the space station and want to, now the moon and the Mars, and always pushing that boundary. And she was part of that. She's part of the legacy of who we are as Americans and our psyche. And so I think it's important to bring her home. Let's find the aircraft. Let's sail it up to Hawaii and over to California, finish her route, and let's get that thing refurbed and on display so Americans can say, yes, this is part of who we are. It's
Oh, I'm
cool.
ready. Let's go now, Tom.
I know, I know. Yeah,
We just need millions of dollars before we go, right?
that's true. That's true. But it's out there. It's doable. You refine that area based on the data. You follow the science. You don't make up something and then say, "Oh yeah, see, this proves it." "Oh yeah, we found something on an island here, and that must be hers." Well, there's no smoking gun there.
Right.
But taking data, follow the data, find out where it leads you to. So when we first started this, we really had no clue
Mhm.
about all this other stuff. It wasn't really on our radars. We're busy. But as we got into it, we started working the data, working the experiments, and what have you. We said, yeah, she crashed and sank. And so that area that we're looking in now is, yes, it's a big ocean, but it's doable. And that's the key, is that it's real doable. It's time and money, but it's not like it's not the whole Pacific Ocean, right?
Right.
We've got a narrow area. Yeah.
Well, and there's like a call to her that I'm feeling, just knowing that logically in my brain, that Lockheed Electra 10E is sitting on the surface of the ocean floor somewhere. Well, I keep saying the airplane is there somewhere. And that means there is a set of information that will slowly but surely lead us to that location. And once that's done, I feel that there would be a real sense of American camaraderie around it. I mean, I'm sure there would be controversy and opinions and all that, but I think ultimately everything you just mentioned about what Amelia stood for, that American sense of pushing the boundaries, of pushing the envelope and exploring, I hope we all connect to that when we're getting a new audience involved in our newest search, the next search, continued search for the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing you talk about it makes me know that you're going to teach our audience quite a bit, and maybe even get some future engineers excited about going down these career paths. And I mean, I can see
For
it
sure.
in your life. How does engineering impact who you are outside of the Amelia search? I
Yeah.
mean, I
Well,
just knowing you a little bit. Yes.
yeah, there's not hardly a day that I don't use HF and VHF and what have you. But no, I mean, it's always fascinated me. And when I was 15 years old, I built a shortwave receiver. In fact, I've got it right here. But oh yeah, 1965. But a shortwave receiver, and I had a little piece of wire going around the soffit of our house, and I would listen at night. It was glowing. The lights were on. I had the headphones on, and I just lay in bed and I was listening to Radio Netherlands and HCJB and Radio Moscow and all these stations. I'm going, this little wire, this is magic.
Yeah.
It's just like, what? How can this be? And that's what got me interested in electronics and communications, because I mean, it's less than 2/10 of a microvolt of little electromagnetic waves that hit that little piece of wire. And then here we are talking loud and clear. Here's somebody from Moscow, that's or Radio Free Europe back then during the Cold War. But so it's always been fascinating to me. I still use it. It's a lot of fun. And that's what drew me then to pull in HF propagation experts in our team, that because we use this stuff and we say, well, just for instance, her last transmission's 2.5 hours after sunrise. Well, that means a lot to someone who knows 3105, that knows how to use, for us, 80 meters, 3500. We use that. And if it's 2.5 hours after sunrise, and I posed this to a conference in Chicago, because I have done things like what you're doing. We have a full room, 400 people, and these guys are all amateurs, but they're radio guys that really know radio. And I said, hey, she's running 50 watts AM transmitter, certain antenna that's basically a piece of wire. She's at 1,000 feet. They're hearing her S5 back then. It's as loud as she could be. How far do you think she is away? It's 2.5 hours after sunrise on 80 meters. And I said, it's a rhetorical question. You can send me an email. And the emails I got were very good, and they weren't too bad.
Yeah.
They were within the ballpark. It's not like we're crazy. It wasn't like she's 1,000 miles away. No, not all we can say is she was less than 100 miles away. So that's all we can tell.
Wow. To imagine how far technology's come from those first radios you were building as a child to now going back out to sea and testing your theories around the radio communications with underwater autonomous drones that are going to search the ocean floor. I mean, you've seen a huge span of technology through your life. That's pretty cool.
Yes, the sonar too. Just in the sonar itself, we were using towed array sonars, and that thing, we were towing 3 miles behind the ship and 3 miles down. And it took 8 hours just to turn around and what we call mowing the lawn. And that's where you just go up. And in the Midwest here, everybody knows harvesting, right? It's just like you're cultivating corn. You're just going back and forth for hours on end. And that's basically what you're doing with sonar and towed array. And it took a long time to turn that ship around with that trailing wire. So now you can just put her down there, turns around. Autonomous vehicle speeds up the process. It's highly efficient. And our next expedition, we hope to take 3 or 4 of those out, which will cover a lot of area in a little bit of time, hopefully, very efficiently, and hopefully ping off that aircraft. Like you say, it's an aluminum aircraft. It's in 18,000 feet of water, 5,400 meters down, below freezing. It's 30 degrees. It's dark, no oxygen. No currents. People always say, well, wouldn't it be covered? Well, when you have an airplane like in the World War II, when they land in a lagoon or something, the currents and everything can bury that in the sediment. But down there, no. And Elgin Long, we have a video of Elgin Long, who wrote the book Amelia Earhart, Mystery Solved, that kind of got us also fired up and going, yeah, this is doable. And he said, that airplane will look just about like it went down the day it went down, just a little bit of dust, because as it goes down, there's no currents and it just lays on the bottom of the ocean. So I think there'll be surprises, just like there were on Titanic or any of the other. There's always going to be more questions, but to actually find that aircraft finally after all these years, wow, fantastic.
It's It feels
Gives you
electric.
chills.
Yeah, it is it's a special opportunity that I feel so grateful to be a part of it. And it hits me at like a sentimental level sometimes that all of your hard work for all these years is something that I get to help team up with now and tell the story of. So I just have such a reverence for everything you all have done so far. And it's really cool to hear about. One of the things, and I know this might be a little specific, but I want to talk about the Lockheed Electra, because I think in human brains, when we think about a plane crashing on the ocean and sinking, we're kind of picturing modern day aircraft, or maybe a vehicle that might have a pressure seal on it. Amelia and Fred
Yeah.
did not have a pressure seal on the Lockheed Electra. So if Amelia were to ditch or land the plane on the water, if she theoretically, as they were realizing that they could not find land, they would try to have as gentle of a landing or ditching on the water as possible. Water would start flooding into the plane immediately, right? Or do you know if they would have popped a door to try to get out? Can we talk about that moment?
Oh boy. Well, no one knows, right? So from that point of view, yeah. So but we talk amongst ourselves with those same kind of issues.
Yeah.
This aircraft is not a pressurized aircraft. No, not until like the B-29 in World War II. So the B-17s, B-24s, those guys were up there with big furry suits on, at 20,000 feet,
Mm-hmm.
shooting those 50 caliber machine guns and flying those airplanes as young men.
Right.
And but in 36, 37, no, it was just she had a hatch above her head, and there was a door on the side where they could go in. But and then the fuel tanks were going down the middle of the fuselage, and there was a sheet of plywood over that.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked to she would have about a minute or two from 1,000 feet to make sure that aircraft is trimmed out. It's a dead stick landing. I mean, you don't practice landing
No.
on water, right? Unless you're in a PBY or an albatross or something. So an amphibious aircraft is one thing. Just a commercial aircraft is totally different. Uh, there has been one case where a commercial passenger L-10 crashed in water. They had to ditch, and it sank in 8 minutes. Now, it didn't have the fuel tanks in the middle, and they all got out. Okay. But now here you're talking an aircraft that uh, she's out of fuel totally, no fuel in it, light. The engines are way out in front, so her CG's forward, and she comes in and she has to at that point flare the aircraft above the ocean floor or the ocean surface, and that's kind of hard to judge with the horizon. You have the horizon there, but how far are you really above that? It's kind of like high divers at the state fair. You have these people in the pond down below kicking up the water, and they do that so the diver can judge the distance before they hit onto
Mm-hmm.
that. You don't want to pancake on from 70 feet up, right?
Right.
So she has to pull back then and flare the aircraft. She always has to keep her kinetic energy up above stall speed, and then flare the aircraft and pancake it in. And if she did that correctly, it just means that that nose is going down, and that it won't be very long before that front hatch is underwater.
Wow.
Um, did she survive? Who knows? We know. I mean, once we find the aircraft, if the seatbelt is buckled and her clothes are laying there, you
Wow.
know, that she didn't make it, I mean,
Yeah.
there's just those things. If it's unbuckled, if the back door is open or the hatch is open, who knows?
Can you imagine the questions we'll all have if we look around and see that? Wow. And
Exactly.
as you're describing, you're prefacing and saying there's so
Excuse
many
me.
assumptions that we're making about those last final moments, right? There's so much we don't know. There are
Hmm.
logical, things that pilots would train for, and maybe how they possibly would have reacted. Well, when you were talking about the glide time, if Amelia and Fred were at 1,000 feet, that's only about a minute of gliding. What happens in flying, as you know, Tom, our viewers may not be aware, but as I was flying the Pilatus around the world, single engine plane, one propeller out on the front of the nose, I was at 27,000 feet. if my engine failed at 27,000 feet, I would pitch for what's called best glide, and it's the most efficient glide ratio. So you could stay up as high and go as far as possible to give yourself time to think and process, what do I do between now being in glide or in flight without engine power and touching any surface? They had 1 minute.
Right.
We
That's
just
less than
minutes
less than
here, right?
Sully Sullenberger,
Yeah.
right?
Wow, what
Sully
an interesting
had
fact.
longer time than that, but I mean, that was very good, quick thinking. But
Yes, yes,
still, and he water landed perfectly,
right.
bringing all those things together at the right time to be able to land that aircraft on the Hudson. But yeah, we don't know, and no one knows. You know, what happened? What happened to Fred in the back, or was he in the back? You know, we always say, well, where would Fred be, right? You know, it's like,
Right.
where's Waldo? It's we're saying, well, once they set at 7:42, we must be on UCANA-CU. Gas is running low. Got 30 minutes of fuel left. One of the logs says. Um, you know, his navigation is done. That's what's happened. We must be on UCANA-CU. His navigation solution is complete.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, he has only a couple of things that he can do to tell Amelia what to do. But he has his line of position. We know that because they said it in the last transmission. But we don't know if they did a north offset or a south offset, or were they flying directly in. You know, all those things are possibilities. But so there's a lot of complications there that go into that last bit of last hour, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
of flying that aircraft. And then you get to the last minute, and when she says wait, we're thinking that's when the engine's coughed. You know, it was an hour after she said she was low on fuel, and the engine's coughed. She doesn't want to talk on the radio. She wants to throw that mic down. She's got, you know, your first priority, you know, as a pilot is fly the airplane, right?
Yeah.
Fly the plane.
Navigate, navigate, communicate.
Yeah. Yeah. So, no, it's an interesting problem for sure. The mystery, though, every time we speak at these conferences, whether it's Rod or myself or Dave or Jeff, all part of the team, uh, crowds are crazy and you know about it. You know, they're packed in there, and what really I really like to do are the women's groups
Yeah.
because they are very excited about, you know, here's this, you know, their hero really.
Right.
I've talked to several different women's groups that it was just like, oh, you know, tell us more. What was going on? You know, what was happening in there? And but they always admire her, and she's a hero to them, a role model, and so that is why, you know, you have your foundation helping young women who are interested in aviation to sponsor them, help them get their ticket right, and move on. I know I just saw Captain, what was her name last year, that got the Euro from 10 years from your award?
Yes, Camilla Bradley.
Kamia. I
Oh
keep on
boy.
wanting to say Kamala, and I know that's not right because that's Kamala Harris.
Yes,
So,
yes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It's so neat because one of the last interviews Amelia did before she departed on her around the world flight, someone said one of the many questions she got, why are you doing this? And she said, so women of tomorrow can fly tomorrow's planes. And I love that foresight that Amelia knew that the technology would continue to evolve. She saw it
Wow.
throughout her own life amplify so rapidly and saw her own progression. So I love that she was thinking about the future and knew that it wouldn't always be celestial navigation and steam gauges. But could Amelia ever imagine things like synthetic vision and all these forms of communication that we have and redundancy, backups? I feel like in a lot of ways, my flight in 2014 was simple and easy. I mean, certainly compared to Amelia's, it's still a very difficult task to do any sort of circumnavigation. But I think Amelia would have been proud of not only how far we've come, but I think Amelia would also, and this is overstepping, obviously I'm not related to her or anything, but I feel like Amelia would appreciate the Nauticos team because of the approach you're taking towards the location and recovery of the aircraft. It's very scientific, it's earnest, it's logical, and that's what really drew me to the program. And it seems like you really have
Yeah.
those values as well.
Yeah, we call it a engineering CSI approach.
Yeah.
So whether it's Cedar Rapids CSI from there, but yes, we tried to use the data and follow the data. And that is really, I think, what sets us apart from a lot of the different theories and what have you. Because there are, we acknowledge those other theories, but to take things like Buka, that she turned around and went to New Guinea. And we go, no, wait a minute. Our data shows that she went past her point of no return, you know,
Yes.
and so there's no way she could get that airplane back over there. So don't waste your time and money over there, right? We wouldn't. Once we said, okay, yeah, it's obvious she's past the point of no return. She didn't go to Tarawa and all these other kind of ideas down. She didn't make it to New Guinea or Bougainville, so no, doesn't happen that way.
And that's the value of all the other additional searches and other theories of where is Amelia. In a way, that research actually amplifies the nautical search because it's eliminating possibilities. So it's lucky for us that all these other conflicting theories have gone out, and it's process of
Yeah.
elimination. And it's interesting, earlier in my life, people would say, oh, would you ever get involved with the search for Amelia? And in my younger years, I was just like, I'm all airplanes. I want to think about
Mhm.
Amelia in the context of what she loved while she was alive. And I would say, I'll let the experts focus on where she could have been after her disappearance and ultimately her death. But now, at 42 years old, I'm thinking, what a full circle connection to this amazing woman who has changed my life to get to go back out and now explore this different part of my brain in relation to Amelia's story and putting that into the works. I just know I'm going to learn so much from all of you. And I feel like I'm back in school again, like just all this whoosh of
Well,
information coming out
you
of the
know,
team.
I,
So fun.
you were a protege of her, though, and her legacy. You are a risk taker. I mean,
Thank
you flew a single engine airplane across the Pacific, and that is risk taking. She had two engines, right?
you.
So I mean, yeah, there's a thing about redundancy, and single point failures that we would do in our normal everyday work in the avionics and HF communications areas, is that you do an analysis of all your single point failures of where that could happen and where you need redundancy to get up to a reliability level that's, and in the aviation industry, 5 nines. That's 0.9995 times out. It has to be. That's why you have today triple redundant hydraulics on aircraft.
Yes.
And so even then, you have a United 238, I think it was, that went into Sioux City, and hydraulics went out, totally out. How can that happen? It has triple hydraulics. Well, the turbine blade went through the aircraft, and they ran the three lines next to each other, so it cut all of them at once.
Oh,
So
wow. So they
yeah,
cut
so
3 layers of redundancy in one fell swoop.
right. One turbine blade went through those and cut them, and so he had, and the pilot, again, a brilliant pilot, flew that aircraft with no hydraulics, using just the throttles, and almost had a perfect landing, but then it finally stalled the right wing and it cartwheeled. But brilliant flying on
Yeah.
that aircraft.
Oh
So, but
boy.
anyway, you're a picture of part of the legacy of Amelia Earhart, in my opinion.
Thank
But
you.
getting the sponsors, like George and her, and having to go and get all this, getting the money and what have you, and then the sponsorship, but then also all the organization, like you say, the multiple layers of complexity, especially if you're going to go around the world. Um, I wonder sometimes, if she had gone west, or if she had successfully taken off at Hawaii, she would have finished this flight.
Wow.
And
That's
so
yeah.
it really changed things when she went, instead of going west, she went east. But Harry Manning knew navigation, and he was a radio operator. And Harry Manning was traveling with them and was only going to go from Hawaii down to Howland. And that's only a 1,600-mile flight, not a 2,500-mile flight. Uh, and so with that extra expertise in there and not as far, finding that little island, they probably would have found her and landed at Howland. And of course, then he gets off. Well, yeah, but it's just her and Fred. But then they're flying west to New Guinea, which is a huge island, and they can hit that island, right? it's not this half a mile wide, 1.5 miles long thing. So I'm convinced if she had successfully taken off there, she would have made it. But then going east, that also changed all those logistics that had been set up along the way, and winds and what have you.
Can you imagine if you were planning to go around the world westbound, as in Oakland to Honolulu? That's where they had a crash on their first attempt. That's why they had
Right.
to postpone, rebuild, replan. It would not be like, oh, making a few adjustments to your original plan. This would be an entirely new plan because everything is reversed because of the prevailing winds, the weather window they were in, etc. Um,
Hmm.
they also would not have been as fatigued because they would have been only, a few weeks into their flight around the world, going through the most difficult part. And when I reflect on our flight in 2014, the fatigue that I even felt entering into Papua New Guinea was emotionally draining. Know that we were about to cross the longest stretches, 8 to 10 hours of flying with only ocean in all directions. It invites a different level of fear and exhaustion. So to think about them maybe not having that crash, it could have been, and then heck, we
Hmm.
wouldn't be here on this call all these years
No, we
later.
wouldn't. No, we wouldn't, would we? And that airplane would be over in the Smithsonian or somewhere. So,
Exactly,
like or
exactly.
Vega, right?
And that's the way it goes. Exactly how this conversation began, Tom. It's that one bit of information skews the course, and then you have to react from that point, right? It's all that chain of, you can't wish it happened this way to make your equation easier. It is what it is, and we make decisions
Hmm.
going forward from that point. Well,
Right.
Tom, I hate to wrap this already so early. This is one of many conversations that we'll be having here as we help the public to get to know the Nauticus team and prepare for our next search.
Right.
So I want to thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait for our conversations to continue.
Yeah, thank you. Look forward to seeing you again and talking about Amelia again and what we've got to do yet. So this will be fun.